Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Actor Talk. Today's episode I'm going to be talking about memorizing lines. We've all been there. You're on stage or a screen, doing a scene, and all of a sudden you can't remember your next line. Frustrating, right? Scary, especially if you're doing a live show. But many of us just have a problem memorizing lines in the first place. So what techniques can we use to help get our lines fully memorized? Continue watching to find out. So there are a lot of videos out there that talk about memorizing lines. I'm going to cover a couple techniques that are typically talked about in those videos. Then I'm going to talk about some techniques you may not have thought about. So the first technique that's quite often mentioned is to say the lines out loud over and over again until you memorize them. While it may work for some, I personally have a few issues with it. First, saying the lines out loud has the drawback of you putting in a specific inflection into the lines, and therefore you end up saying it that exact same way every single time. This is problematic because when you memorize in this way, you get stuck in the specific inflections that you were doing without realizing it, and you end up being very robotic, very much like a parrot in the scene instead of being very spontaneous with how the dialogue comes out. Here's the way dialogue actually should work in a scene. You memorize the lines without any inflection or any other thing added to it that you will get into the habit of doing every single time. And you memorize it so well that you don't even have to think about it when you're on stage or on set. Then when you're in the scene, you put all of your attention on your scene partner, how they're behaving, letting their behavior affect you, and then responding truthfully in that circumstance with the lines you were given. So basically it's just like real life. You're talking to somebody, you hear them say something, they say something to you that offends you. And so that affects you. You respond truthfully and say whatever comes into your head. That's real life. So in acting, it's the exact same thing. We're working in such a way that we're doing the exact same thing, except instead of responding with whatever comes into our head, we're responding with the dialogue that we were given. So you can see how important it is for the dialogue to be very fresh, very spontaneous, especially since we've been working on it for a very long time. And we can get into a habit of saying the lines so that way they're very dull, very dead, and no meaning to them. So it's really important that we get to a place in our memorization that we don't have to think about the lines, but when they come out spontaneous, fresh, and with meaning. The lines should feel like they're coming from your heart, not from your head. If you had to think about the lines you are saying next, it'll take you out of the moment. Now, I realize that in real life conversations, we have to think about what we're going to say next, process what's been said, and all of that. I get that. However, there's a big difference in how a person looks when they're trying to think of what to say versus trying to remember what they're going to say. So if you have lines that you've memorized and you're trying to remember what to say, trying to recall that line, we'll see on the camera especially that you're trying to remember something to say. You're trying to recall what the line is, as opposed to that sort of look you get when you're thinking of what to say. There's a very slight difference, but it's enough of a difference that it's obvious on camera. So you want to know the lines so well you don't have to think about them at all. They'll just come out of you once you hear your cue line. And when that happens, the lines come out very spontaneous. You're not thinking about it, you're not dwelling on the lines, you're not in your head trying to remember your next line while the other person's talking to you. Instead, all of your attention is on your scene partner and their behavior, so that way you can be responding truthfully, really listening. I talked about in my previous video about really listening. One of the biggest problems with people listening is they're in their own head thinking about their next line. We don't want to do that. This is how we fix that, by knowing the lines so well. Another way to memorize lines is to write them out. This one I really agree with and I use quite often. Writing out the dialogue by hand is really helpful in connecting with the words, and writing them out several times will really aid in the memorization process. Now there are some pitfalls to writing out dialogue that we can fall into, and this has to do with grammar. So when we write dialogue, we use something called punctuation. Punctuation are those notations that we use in writing to help convey what it is we're trying to communicate. It helps make the writing clear and the context apparent. The thing is, punctuation is only used in writing. We don't use punctuation when we speak. Instead, we use inflection, tone, pitch, pauses, and other things to convey what we're trying to say. So basically, it's hard to understand what someone's trying to say if they wrote it out without punctuation. But we would understand very well what they mean if they were saying it. So punctuation basically acts as our inflections, our pauses, our volume, all of that we use in speaking for writing. Now here's the pitfall. Using punctuation in writing for memorization will follow the punctuation. So if there's a question mark, we tend to go up in inflection. So for example, if I say the line, "Do you know how that diamond got in your handbag?" I go up in inflection automatically because I see a question mark there, and we think question mark equals upward inflection. And the problem is we'll get into the habit of saying it that way every single time. So every single time you're on set or on stage and you say the line, "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" You always go up in inflection, and you don't have the freedom to let it come out spontaneously. So here's what you do instead. You write the dialogue out by hand without any capitalization, without any punctuation, and without any stage direction. So it's just a run-on sentence that goes on and on and on for as long as your line is. This takes away the tendency to pause where there are periods or commas, or going upwards in inflection when there's a question mark, or yelling when you see an exclamation point, and so on. This way you end up being able to get that out of your mind and focus on just the words. But that's not all to it. In addition to that, memorizing your lines, saying them out loud, we can still tend to do some of that inflection and stuff. So instead what you do is when you read the line and you say it out loud, you're going to say it in what we call memorizing by rote. Memorizing by rote basically means memorizing without meaning. So we're taking all the context, all the meaning out of the words. And we're going to say the lines in a monotone and monosyllabic way. So if I take the line, "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" I'm going to say it like this. "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" Every single syllable was the exact same length. I didn't say it all with varying lengths of syllables as we normally use when we talk. And it was also on the exact same musical note. It never went up or down. I wasn't going like this when I was talking. It all stayed on the same pitch. And the reason for this is to allow you to memorize it without any meaning, without any inflection, so that way when you say the line in the moment, like I said earlier, it'll come out however it comes out, and it'll be the most truthful, most natural way possible. So now when I memorize it that way and I say the line, it could come out like, "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" Or it could be, "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" Or, "Do you know how this diamond got in your handbag?" So you can get a lot of different variations on it. Not pre-planned, mind you. You don't plan ahead of time how you're going to say the line. But instead, you know the line backwards and forwards, and it comes out however it comes out in that moment based off of what you're getting from your scene partner. But the memorization by rote is key. Now there is another aspect of memorizing that I have found quite recently to be very helpful, although it's not an actual technique for memorization. So in the Meisner technique, for rehearsal, there are several different steps you go through. The first step, of course, is to read the script. That's really important. And then we have something that we call the mechanical read. And that is where basically we sit across from each other as actors, we look at our script, and we say the lines in a monotone, monosyllabic way. This is just a way to hear the other lines being spoken out loud without any context, so that we were not trying to act the scene out. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. This is stuff I'll talk about in future videos as well. But basically I'm trying to give you some structure here for how the working reading lends itself to memorization. So next is what we call the working reading. And the working reading is basically where you sit across from your scene partner after you've done the mechanical read a few times, and you look each other in the eye, and the person who has the dialogue will look down at the script, get as much of the dialogue as they can possibly get without forgetting it. Then they look their scene partner in the eye and say as much of the line as they can remember. Once they can't remember anymore, they look back down at their script, get the next several words, look back at their scene partner, look them in the eye, and say the lines. And they go back and forth like this, each person maintaining eye contact the entire time someone is speaking. And what I discovered is that when doing that, I find after doing a couple rounds of the working reading, I'm memorizing the dialogue so fast because I'm taking just little portions of it and then saying it to my scene partner without looking at the script. So I'm forcing myself to already memorize the words. Still without any real emotion behind it or any context, just saying it naturally now. But I'm finding that I'm memorizing it really fast. So it's definitely a great way to go. But again, this is a byproduct of this rehearsal technique. It's not primarily or supposed to be meant as a memorization technique. And I will guarantee you that if you work in this way, if you memorize the lines by rote, if you do the working reading in rehearsal, if you do these things, you will memorize the dialogue very fast and have it down super well. So those are some of the techniques for memorization that I highly recommend. Let me know what you think of those techniques in the comments below. So try them out and then comment below and let me know how they work for you. Also, if you have any other memorization techniques that you want to mention, go ahead and list them. Also, as always, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell to get notified the minute my videos come out. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, keep living truthfully.